All right, welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. I'm Cassandra, your organic beauty expert and endocannabinoid mentor. I'm super excited about today's episode. We're going to be discussing how the endocannabinoid system protects your body from stress, injury, and disease with Dr. Jake Felice. So before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to share a little bit more about the incredible background Dr. Jake holds and the incredible leadership that he holds in the cannabis industry. So Dr. Jake Felice provides scientific, medical, and compliance-based advice for companies in emerging and existing cannabis markets. Clinically, Dr. Felice specializes in the treatment of chronic pain and the improvement of human performance. Dr. Felice's comprehensive approach to pain combines traditional healing practices with the best of modern science. He believes that memory, emotions, and entrenched neural patterns play an enormous role in how the mind perceives pain, and that the healing processes are managed on all levels, that being of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Currently, Dr. Felice spends his time in Santa Barbara, California, where he enjoys surfing, a daily yoga practice, and maintains his practice in Washington State and continues consulting nationally. I'd have to say, wow. And I just want to welcome Jake. Are you with us?
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Cassandra. I am with you and super excited to be here to be talking about this really very cutting edge 21st century phenomenon in medicine, the endocannabinoid system.
Awesome. Now, Jake, Dr. Jake, I think we can both agree that the topic of CBD is certainly being saturated in the market as we know it today. And as a formulator and a provider of CBD products for over 2 years, I really wanted to invite you on because no other than you really capture the endocannabinoid system. So as the influx of CBD products is getting into the market, I really wanted to focus on a bigger picture, which I think is somewhat getting lost. And that is, like I referenced, the endocannabinoid system. So, I'm super excited to jump in and have our tribe by the end of this episode, really be able to connect the dots on how it works and how they can most productively enhance their endocannabinoid system. So, to start us off, you have a very vast background in natural medicine. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about your background, and then also what awakened you? How did you become aware of cannabis specifically, and why did it create so much interest for you as you started your practice using this amazing plant?
Sure, great. Yes, I will answer that second part later. I have very recently, over the past couple of years, really been focusing on education in and around this system. I teach through the Department of Health in Washington State. In Washington, we require all of certain types of cannabis employees to have education, so I perform and teach those classes. I also teach at various schools such as University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I am a part-time faculty and member of the Cannabis Institute at Seattle Central College. And folks can check my resume for the running list of topics that I discuss. I'm really interested in the education piece because I think it's not only important for the individual patient to understand the individual intricacies of the endocannabinoid system, but I also think that given the culture and the climate of the world that we are living in, it really is kind of, for a lot of people, feels like it's getting to be a crazy place. And I think that the endocannabinoid system offers societal healing, not just individual healing. So I'm very interested in that. And clinically, the main thing about cannabis and CBD products that is really astounding, not only is their broad effectiveness, which I'd be happy to chat about and the reasons for why, but in particular, they're very low toxicity. So that as a clinician, we are often balancing what is the potential benefit of a therapy versus the potential risk. And while no therapies are without risk, I think that cannabinoid products in general are, if you look at them, especially in comparison with, say, opiate medications or even NSAID medications like ibuprofen, Celebrex, that kind of thing, the safety profile of cannabis is superb. Mm-hmm. And the side effect profile, although there are side effects, and there are side effects, however, they tend to be relatively mild. Things like being too sleepy, for example. Mm-hmm. And we can talk more about the specifics of those later. What happened for me clinically in my practice, as you mentioned, I am a pain and performance clinician. I really feel that the two of those are largely intertwined. For example, when pain is severe, our performance really suffers. So one day on a busy clinic day, I had back-to-back patients take themselves off of two different drugs were identical, and they were different classes of medication. And just that coincidence struck me. The first patient, I happened to ask, what in the world did you do? Mm-hmm. And they said that they used the M word, which I like to always preface with, and they said medical marijuana, and it didn't really faze me because they used the M word. But the second patient used the C word, which is the word medical cannabis. Mm-hmm. And just the ring of the technical tone of that, and the prior patient, I started to connect the dots, and I think I did what Sanjay Gupta did, the CNN doctor, and I started looking at the studies. And I always hear in the literature, we need more studies, we need more human studies. I absolutely agree. For sure, we need more studies, but we certainly know things like cannabis is effective for pain. I think it can be reasonably said that first, it's a wonderful anti-seizure medication. But if you look and compare cannabis as a medicinal plant, which is an area that is very fond for me, with all other medicinal plants on the planet with known and accepted efficacies, there is more literature, more scientific literature, more peer-reviewed literature on cannabis than any other plant that I am aware of in the entire global biosphere, with a possible exception of garlic. So if you are looking at it from a botanical perspective, in terms of the scientific base of cannabis, we know so much about it. There are inherent differences between botanical drugs and single molecule drugs, which I'd be happy to chat about. One thing, for example, is that we have thousands of years of
experiences
for humans using medical cannabis, and never ever in any medical journal, in any language, in any year, date, or decade, one documented history of death by overdose.
Right.
So you compare that safety profile with a molecule that is being developed by a pharmaceutical company that has the majority of these molecules that are new, Cassandra, are so unique that they've never existed before in the history of the universe. So you have something with thousands of years of documented, not necessarily clinical, but non-clinical data, combined with a massive amount of clinical animal studies, etc. And we can very safely make claims about the toxicity of cannabis, I believe. So that, combined with real good scientific evidence now that medical cannabis patients are taking themselves off of multiple classes of medication. That's not necessarily advisable, but that's what they're doing.
Right.
Predominantly pain medications, but various other classes of medications. And I take that into a clinical setting and I say, what's the potential benefit and what's the potential risk of medical cannabis? And for many folks, I think it is a good option to try. Now, that being said, it doesn't work for everybody, and it's not a major pain reliever. It's kind of a minor to moderate pain reliever, but it just offers potential of so many clinical tools, especially for treatment-resistant conditions.
Right.
And this is where the endocannabinoid system comes in. And, you know, Cassandra, I talk a lot, so feel free to interrupt me. I can go on probably straight for 60 minutes.
Yeah. You know, and I think on that basis, you know, so as a natural practitioner, and I have a vast background in functional medicine, and I have a lot of friends that, you know, there's all these different variances of severe chronic diseases to people with just low grade stress and everyday symptomatic issues. And, you know, for the topic of NSAIDs, so the ibuprofens, you know, these support systems and or crutches that a lot of people will lean on. Some, you know, they need them, and some it's just kind of a crutch, you know, even in putting it in that spectrum, if not putting a negative connotation on an ibuprofen, but what cannabis or CBD can specifically do to couple that NSAID integration and to integrate those together to, if you have to take an NSAID or a medication, sometimes there's obviously the pathway issue with medications and how that can kind of dilute the medication, but to support the neural pathway system, to support the stressor system on the body and how it protects the body from those kind of single molecule type medications that you're speaking with. There's just so much overlay that to go into the safety profile of cannabis and where it's created this stigma. I'm really happy to see that practitioners are having to wake up to it because the patients are asking for answers.
Well, and you know, you bring up the NSAID class, which, you know, as you mentioned, ibuprofen is a part of that class. And we hear a lot about the opiate medications. So I'm just going to address that briefly, but I want to talk about NSAIDs because there are really only two major classes of medications for long-term chronic pain: opiates and NSAIDs. And opiates, in states where there are licensed medical cannabis laws, we have 25% fewer opiate-related deaths. And I can talk about that at length. I've recently presented Category 1 CME courses for doctors, pharmacists, et cetera, on that. But NSAIDs are far more frequently taken by the majority of the population for acute pain and also for chronic pain. And they have a side effect profile that is pretty, when you look into it, it's pretty severe. For example, depending, and I have all of these referenced, if folks want to, I have a blog post on NSAIDs. If folks just want to Google my name and NSAIDs, I'm sure it'll come up for the peer-reviewed information, because I take everything back to the peer-reviewed data.
Science,
between 25% on the low end up to, I believe it's 55% of people will have an NSAID side effect. They're very hard on the stomach. They're also quite hard on liver and kidneys. And if you look at just two disease factors, rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis, which are not the only reasons that people take NSAIDs, but if you look at just two disease categories, and if you look at one type of death that those medications cause, death from gastrointestinal problems, those would be the 15th leading cause of death. Over 16,000 people a year are dying from taking NSAIDs just for those two conditions, just caused by problems with that one system. We I think need, and I do think that doctors, clinicians are not really fully aware of the full scope of the problems with NSAIDs to a large degree. Now, when taken together, cannabis and NSAIDs actually can work well together. For example, there are studies in humans where smoked cannabis, and I don't ever recommend smoking for my patients, but smoked cannabis will protect the human stomach from gastric irritation from NSAIDs. So that if you are taking your cannabis along with an NSAID, you're going to be getting stomach protection. Also, we could go into, and this is not specific for NSAID damage to liver, but specifically CBD has wonderful liver protecting properties, and also THC does as well. Feel free to interrupt me. I have most of these studies in my brain. But also, in terms of combining modalities, a lot of people are getting an additive effect of combining the pain relief of NSAIDs with cannabis products, so that you don't necessarily have to do one or the other. They can both work very well together. Now, one very fascinating thing about NSAIDs that is good for cannabis is that folks who are taking NSAIDs along with cannabis, sometimes we all know, the vast majority of us, that sometimes a little bit too much THC can make folks a little bit, shall we say, take the IQ level down a little bit, right? They increase short-term memory loss, etc. Now, that's not from CBD products, because CBD products protect that. But THC, I call it a stupefacient. It's something that makes you stupid, temporarily. And after you're done using, that comes back. But while you are under the influence of THC, NSAIDs will actually help protect against some of that short-term memory impairing effect. So you have the case where the cannabis is helping the stomach irritation with NSAIDs, and you're having the NSAIDs helping with the mental fogginess of THC. So I find that is a wonderful combination to at least try out clinically with folks. And, you know, medical cannabis works a lot like the practice of anesthesia. When doctors are when the anesthesiologist is in the operating room, they're interacting with one patient, and it's a kind of a real-time medicine. So cannabis works in a very similar way. This is not something that is unusual necessarily for medicine, but it is something that is very much the way a lot of botanical medicine is practiced.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting that you bring that up. And it just the neurofeedback system that we're built of, you know, so to go back to kind of lay some groundwork, can we just take a couple seconds on just kind of building up and helping the listener understand what exactly is their endocannabinoid system? I think a lot of people have read a lot of blogs, they've listened to a lot of things, so we don't have to go too in depth, but what are the CB1, CB2 receptors, and kind of how that interacts together. And really what we want to talk about is how do we optimize this endocannabinoid system that we innately have? And there's variable ways that we can do that, but let's start with what it is, and then we can go into optimizing it.
Sure. So the first thing that I always like to, because the endocannabinoid system is largely a 21st century phenomenon.
Right.
There are parts of it that were discovered well before the 21st century, but our idea of what it is continues to evolve.
Right.
And what it really is something that we haven't really seen before medically. I'll start from the basics. What is a cell receptor? I've got an earphone on this side. I've got an earphone on this side. Receptors are kind of like antenna on the outside of individual cells that pick up messages or signals, kind of like an antenna or an ear. Some people refer to them as like a catcher mitt that transmits information. But the receptors are information transfer molecules where information from outside of the cells comes to the cell and creates changes within the cell. The largest receptor system in the human nervous system, in the mammalian nervous system, so not just humans, but all mammals, is the endocannabinoid system. It is the most robust receptor system. So that means that we have more listening devices on our cells for the endocannabinoid system than any other receptor system in the entire nervous system. What that means is that this system is constantly relaying a vast amount of information at any one time. Also, you'll hear doctors talk about receptor populations. That basically means how many people are listening. Like if it's a YouTube channel, how many, or if it's a YouTube live, how many people are tuned in live at one time. The endocannabinoid receptor system is very dynamic and fluid. So say, for example, in the nervous system, you can have at any one time 25-fold difference in the number of receptors going on in the nervous system. Usually when there is a traumatic event or some type of an illness, the number of receptors increase so that the system senses that there's a problem and all of a sudden there are more receptors.
Right. Which is why we can say that it is our basis of homeostatic. So it's bringing us its role is to always keep us in balance and to constantly be in fluidity with the stress responses in the body.
That's right. Now, and if you look at the evolution of where it came from and how it developed, it's 600 million years old.
Right.
It is, I think, I could be mistaken, so I'll use a caveat. One of the oldest receptor systems one of the oldest neurotransmitter systems that we're aware of.
Right.
600 million years old. And I think of it a little bit differently than most clinicians, I think, because most of us still were trained in the 20th century. A lot of new doctors are out there. But recently in the journal Science and Nature, if you Google connective tissue as an organ system, we're getting this concept of connective tissue as an organ system. And we really don't, because it's a 21st century phenomenon, we really don't have visuals about what that would look like. But it's kind of, I use the analogy of a brick wall, like in an older, nice neighborhood, those beautiful brick walls. The bricks would represent the cells and the mortar is the connective tissue. So what happened 600 million years ago is all the cells were in the primordial ocean and they would get their nutrition from the ocean and they would put their waste products out into the ocean. What our bodies have done through evolution is literally we brought the ocean inside of us and it exists in connective tissue. For example, blood, plasma, I should be more specific. Plasma is a type of connective tissue. What does it taste like? Seawater. It's the exact same amount of, so our bodies have literally carried the ocean into us. And that is the interface where all cells talk to other cells. It's where the immune system works. All neurotransmission, if you have a nerve cell coming from the brain to the spinal cord and then from the spinal cord down to the legs, that gap between the two nervous system is connective tissue. It's literally happening in the mortar between the bricks. So it becomes, and the buzzword is a reticular system. It means a web-like system. So that the endocannabinoid system is a web-like system that is literally hardwired into almost every single cell in our body. And it acts very much like the internet of our body. It's a hardwiring network. And what happens when the internet's slow? Stuff doesn't work. Or what happens if there's a disease process and there's so much information that the system gets overloaded? I don't want to use the wrong analogy, but it's like when the internet gets busy at around 2 a.m. in the morning and everybody's connection speed is slow because everybody's streaming movies, which require a lot of bandwidth. That's one time that things can, for frequently, people get upset at Comcast or Netflix or whoever the internet service provider is. So the dynamic systems in the body can get overwhelmed. And there is a concept, Ethan Russo, who is he's a neurologist and very well respected cannabinoid professional, talks about endocannabinoid insufficiency syndrome. And basically, the internet of the body is not working well. And one of the things that can improve that are cannabinoids, CBD being amongst them, but also diet can improve it. For example, omega-3 essential fatty acids, exercise can improve it. Acupuncture can improve it. And I just saw a study that was really cool, and it was a women's only study that women who sing, you can actually sing, and that upregulates the endocannabinoid tone. And I don't know if you've ever been in a choir. I personally am an amateur musician. It's one of the most beautiful things to do as a human as to engage that musical apparatus. So things that we classically think of as good for us, massage, chiropractic adjustments, we all have science on this now, actually enhance our endocannabinoid system. So we think in a 20th century drug model where we have a single target receptor and a single molecule drug lands on that receptor, and it's kind of like a flow of dominoes, like the dominoes go through the system. That's old thinking. The new thinking is that the endocannabinoid system is, as I said, it's operating in a reticular fashion, and so it's kind of like it pings out to the whole system. And there are certain nodes that have receive much more influence for that, but it really is a global phenomenon. I went to a conference at UCLA Medical Center, and the doctor was saying, CBD is CBD is CBD. I think I've read that 2 or 3 times. CBD is CBD is CBD. Yes, it's true. The CBD is CBD is CBD, but you can never step into the same river twice. You can never step into the same endocannabinoid system twice. So even though the molecular structures that we may be trying to influence these pathways with are very similar, we have good quality medicines now, etc. Even though those are very similar, the system that they're operating on is very different. So what it means is that patients require very individualized approach. For folks who don't know very much about it, they require a large degree of education that needs to be done properly, and they need to get the right information. And as you can see, by letting me talk so long here, Cassandra, it's something I'm super excited about.
No, and I think that's great. I think it's, I really love the beautiful, just the reference to the singing, and I think could be applied to men as well. But I think
folks can email me, and I can we can post that on your blog, and I can dig that up for them.
But my point,
or just Google it. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
If we look at all of the neurological and how the endocrine system engages just with endorphins in itself. Mm-hmm. So if we put all those things together, if we look at massage, if we mm-hmm. look at our singing and how that that imposes on our endorphins, if we look at the runner's high, right? So we also mm-hmm. know through studies that that's the correlation between endorphins and it rising your AG2 receptors, your anandamide receptors. Mm-hmm. We then can kind of tap into, and this is what, I say with CBD is so wonderful, but really it gets into this long history of our endocannabinoid system and how the medical community and how the research community is now starting to wake up to this and say, okay, how else can we impact the endocannabinoid system? And THC is great. Low dosing, microdosing can be very healing. Cancer, anxiety, get a little too much of it, induce anxiety. CBD is wonderful. We're just now stepping into CBG and CBD mm-hmm, and different cannabinoids. So the industry is young in that sense. But
we're babies. It's like we're like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. We just made the TRS-80 computer. Right. We just left our parents' garage. And we think we're all something now because we have this little tiny computer.
Right.
And yet look what the future holds.
Yep.
And you mentioned functional medicine. I think that this system, we still don't really have live ways to really monitor it yet, but we're working on those. There are ways that you can do genetic, like a cheek scraping, and we can look at the specifics of a snapshot of the endocannabinoid system. So there are ways that we are using in my clinic, for example, to look at that, but we're still at the very beginning. But what, as I mentioned, is it seems that all of the things that we either think feel good or are good for us, or both, like massage, for example, feels good and is good for us, really are enhancing the endocannabinoid system. We talk about omega-3 fatty acids as protective against heart disease or stroke prevention, that type of thing. They're also fantastic for the endocannabinoid system. Exercise activates the endocannabinoid system. Hugs, I have heard from educated colleagues. Now, I don't have a clinical paper on that, but those types of things. So we're talking about a reticular system that is not necessarily limited to single biochemical pathways. And do you know that it is the pharmacologic development of a lot of these processes are actually going on in China right now. And it's my understanding that the Chinese hold almost half of the patents on cannabis. So a lot of what I'm talking about is really, like I said, we're at the beginning, still early in the 21st century.
So on that, do you mean that we're stepping out of layers and layers and levels of regulation in the U.S., right? So in China, are you saying that? Now I'm not talking dirty cannabis, China. You don't want to mess with, heavy laden
That's not
chemical
what I'm talking about, right?
cannabis. What we're talking about is Chinese medicine, and they're really getting intricate in the studies of using cannabis within the
Oh,
medicine
that's a great
platform.
question. Let me rewind because I want to be super clear. The Chinese are not using cannabis, but what they are doing in the hospitals and in the clinics is that acupuncture and Chinese herbs are fully
Right.
integrated into the hospitals. So what they have been doing for the last 20 years, except for the few articles that are being translated, is that they are really looking at how multiple plant compounds are influencing pharmacologically. And one of the buzzwords for your readers to Google is network pharmacology. I don't mean network marketing, I mean network pharmacology,
Yep.
where there are networks and hubs and switches of these biochemical
Right.
pathways. And if you Google network pharmacology, you'll probably come up with some very technical information, but also some very good, like Science or Nature has a big 2008 article on it. And I think that our cutting edge PhDs are right up to speed on this, but your average clinician, such as myself, I'm presumptive to call myself average, but still the average doctor who's seeing patients, this is not something that they're largely aware of. And that the microscope of the future is going to be the computer combined with artificial intelligence to be looking at these networks. And the stability of a biological network is kind of like the internet. If the internet goes down,
Right.
I can't do business.
Right.
The Amazon can't do business.
Right.
Even Costco couldn't do business without the internet. So that the stability of biological networks in terms of functional medicine is really where this is about.
Right.
Isn't that fascinating? I think this is great.
Is.
This is such a good podcast.
The networks are really fascinating. When we talk about the ECS being we talk about the endocrine system, we think about the neurological health, as I specialize in women's wellness, right? So I am the Elementa, which is the fastest growing women's cannabis network in globally, really.
Oh, wow.
And we really talk about I'm young at heart. This is probably the first natural medicine that I feel has so much potential for everyone to be involved in at a grassroots level. And where we focus in women's wellness, our event is coming up, and just siloing the endocrine system, stress hormones specifically on women's health, and even the connection to AG2 and estrogen in the body, looking at the different cannabinoids of CBG and how there's a lot of hope for bone recycling. I mean, that alone, so where I go with keeping the endocannabinoid system healthy is, for instance, you're talking about fatty acids. So right here. So this is an EPA, DHA, cool, calm, clean, calm, and connected fatty acid that we're working on. And in a lot of purchasers of CBD, there's a lot of really expensive cannabis products on the market. They're really beautifully branded, et cetera, et cetera. But we really need to get down to brass tacks of where's the endocannabinoid deficiency, right? So if it's the largest system and network in the body, there's these emails that aren't getting through and into your inbox. So how do we correct that? So there's one on the correction side, and then there's also how do we daily support that? And I'm kind of gearing towards, I'm really into technology. So how do we put something into a liposome, and then how do we maybe double liposome it so we can get it
Sure. And maybe you can explain to the listener what a liposome is.
Liposome, yep. So they're fatty acids, and thank you for that. They're fatty acid. It's kind of like, think of it as a little bubble, right? So there's these bubbles of fatty acids protecting, let's call it medicine. We'll call the the cannabis medicine. It's protecting that so that it can get through as it travels through the body. It can get to where it needs to go so that it's protected. So we know about liposomal. Now, what if we do a double liposome and keep it into a nano, and then it get into that small intestine and get exactly where it needs to go and release right at the right time? So efficiency is even a big deal. So your fatty acids are what make your endocannabinoids. So and fundamentally, we need fat, we need protein so that the liver is working well and processing what we're putting down it. So if we want to talk about that a little bit, how do we support it?
Sure. Most neurotransmitters are proteins, but the endocannabinoids are little lipid molecules. And you mentioned these liposomes. If you can't tell from my last name, Felice, I'm Italian. I talk with my hands. I'm a big eater. And I've had more than one girlfriend tell me when I'm eating cheese, they say surface area, meaning eat a smaller portion. Surface area. It's all about the surface area. Yeah. When we put the cannabinoid molecules into liposomes, it is, as opposed to in a big glom, it is increasing the surface area and therefore enhancing absorption. And you also mentioned the EPA DHA product. And there are also studies with medium chain triglycerides and coconut oils, for example. Your CBD absorption will be up to 4 to 5 times higher if you have these beneficial fats taken along with it versus taken by themselves. Additionally, things like EPA, DHA, omega-3s, you'll read is the buzzword for that. They have anti-inflammatory properties in their own right. And are protective in their own right. So, and it is very much a lipid-based system. And that affects dosing, it affects metabolism, and we're still in a very new place in terms of really talking about specifics of the pharmacology. I think we need about 5 or 6 more years, and we're really going to be able to be connecting some of these dots a lot better. But the lipid component is very, very important. And, a huge percentage of our brain is actually lipid, is actually fat.
Have you heard of PEA, and have you dealt with PEA, considering you do a lot with pain?
I don't do a lot with that. I don't know very much about it. I believe that it has some signaling properties that are endocannabinoid-like. And honestly, I don't know very much about that.
Yeah, so it's found in the body, just like our endocannabinoids, and also kind of runs on the fatty acid production model. I can send you information on that, but there's some evidence that combining CBD and then PEA, that PEA can almost elongate the half-life of the travel of the CBD benefits in the body. So there might be some really good connections.
I'd be super happy to look at that.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. So we've talked about the endocannabinoid deficiency. We've talked about the CB1 and CB2 receptors. You've been working a lot with both CBD, and I know that you cannot, correct me if I'm wrong, you cannot prescribe THC to any of your clients. But is there a rule of thumb where you like to start your patients on if they want to get started on CBD, and where do you direct them? Because a lot of people don't know how to take it, what to take, and they're kind of scared of it.
Sure. Let's talk about the first part first. Nobody can prescribe cannabis now or THC now. Right. I do write authorizations for patients in Washington State. I can legally give a medical card, a cannabis card to my patients. But honestly, I don't do that very much anymore. I'm more of a provider of information. So THC is a Schedule I substance. Nobody can write a prescription for it. Basically, what a medical marijuana card is it is an opinion that the doctor says this patient might benefit.
Right.
In terms of specific doses, I don't give specific doses. I'm very individual in terms of how I approach it. But one of the major clinical considerations is how much THC versus CBD. And if you look at the side effect profiles of cannabis, the negative side effect from cannabis, the vast majority of them come from THC, and they are dose dependent, meaning, first of all, low doses of THC are very, very well tolerated. Let's just put that out there first.
Yep.
But the higher you get,
Yep.
not the higher you get in your head, but the higher you get on the dosage, the more of a chance of having an adverse event is.
Side effects.
So I'm always thinking about how much THC does the patient need and how to manage that. I'm so much more comfortable with CBD. If I tell people, look, if I were stranded on a desert island and you only gave me one of two molecules, I'll take the CBD. But we don't have to do it that way. Hemp products, for example, will contain 0.3% THC. So there are minuscule amounts, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
What I'm doing in folks, I'm also licensed in California, not just in Washington. But what I'm doing with folks who I think could benefit from a little bit of THC is it's a couple of things. It depends on the market. For example, if it is still in a black market state, first of all, CBD you can get in all 50 states. So let's just, but sometimes it can be beneficial to use it. It's just like throwing a little bit of garlic in the soup. You don't need a whole lot of garlic in the soup to make it taste nice. So I do use hemp products alongside with even 20-to-1 type products for patients who, or for your listeners who even understand what a 20-to-1 ratio, 20-to-1 is. That would be 20 parts CBD per 1 part THC. So that if you were to take 20 milligrams of CBD, you'd get 1 milligram of THC. A lot of the times I think that 1 milligram to maybe a 2.5 milligram of THC dose, it doesn't get the vast majority of people any kind of head high, can provide a really good benefit. It can be a very good thing.
Right.
I am much more comfortable dosing CBD products. We always start low and go slowly in terms of titrating up. I feel that most folks will tolerate a 10 milligram dose very, very fine, and you can bump that up either in 5 or 10 milligram. And usually, not always, but usually the first side effect that folks get is sleepiness.
Can we stop right there?
Sure.
Why is it that you think that happens in the body? Why sleepy?
Well, I don't think anyone knows, but we know a few things. For example, we know that CBD lands on serotonin receptors. Right. And serotonin is one of the neurotransmitters, along with GABA, that typically really give us a good mood and also very comfortable feeling. So it could be direct actions on that. I also, Cassandra, have a feeling, and this is purely hypothetical, and it's just no science that I've seen behind it, but I think that, we are running in caffeine-oriented go culture. Right. And a lot of our chronic diseases are stress-induced. Right. So that when a tone or a signal that is influenced, hypothetical, is like it's downtime. Right. I noticed this first. I do a lot of craniosacral, which I think is effective, but I also think it's a little woo-woo. Right. But I love it, and I find it effective and beautifully effective. And by woo, I mean it's just we just don't have very much science behind it. But my patients would always tell me, boy, I got the best sleep of my night after that craniosacral session. And my hypothesis on the cranial work is that it's kind of like hitting the reset button. Mm-hmm. So could it be that the CBD is initiating a response that the system says, hey, we gotta bring this whole thing down? That's one possibility. In support of that, most folks who do engage in that type of a dosing protocol will not experience those same side effects over time. So say, for example, you bump up from 25 to 30 to 40 to 50 milligrams of CBD, and all of a sudden the patient is very tired. Sometimes that patient can just keep taking that same dose. Mm-hmm. They'll sleep for 3 or 4 days, and then the tiredness tends to leave them. Now, the counter argument is, oh, the receptors are adjusting, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
that's
I
an
don't think
area
there's
where
enough science out
we
there, but
don't
I
know
will
that much
say
about it yet.
probably one of the only reactions, for instance, I just had a client walk out and she said, okay, I'm taking the 1000 and she
Mm-hmm.
gets really bad migraines and she just kind of gets tired and a little bit nauseous.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had
Mm-hmm.
her walk out with my 300 a day. It's a different
Mm-hmm.
terpene profile. So
Okay.
that can also have some impact there
Yes.
are
Terpenes.
excitatory terpenes and there are down-regulating terpenes.
Absolutely. And
So,
some terpenes will enhance the crossing of the blood-brain barrier.
right,
They will actually help things cross the blood-brain barrier.
exactly.
Now, we don't have any studies that I'm aware of, with the exception of myrcene, of enhancing the blood-brain barrier. And myrcene, as you probably know, is it's common in mangoes, and it's a
Yep,
sleeper. It's a sleep-inducing
yep,
terpene. But we don't have any data or a lot of data on that. And also I think that conventional practitioners really don't understand how plant molecules work.
absolutely.
For example, there's another class of molecules in cannabis called flavonoids.
Right.
And the classic example I use involves alkaloids from another plant. And this plant has anti-malarial properties. These alkaloids that the plant makes have anti-malarial, they kill the malarial parasite. And if you take the one that's the strongest alkaloid to kill that malarial parasite, those mosquitoes develop a resistance to
Right.
that very quickly, and it becomes ineffective.
Ineffective.
However, so you've taken that out of, and I think that they come from chrysanthemum plants, but I'd have to check on that.
Yeah.
You take that same alkaloid molecule, isolated, the mosquito gets resistance. But if you do it as a whole plant, that plant comes with a flavonoid. And if you combine the flavonoid with the alkaloid, the flavonoid doesn't do anything to mosquitoes.
Mm-hmm.
If you give them mosquitoes the flavonoids, it doesn't kill them. But if you give the alkaloid with the flavonoid,
Yeah.
the mosquitoes do not develop resistance. They don't develop resistance. So these secondary plant molecules can have non-pharmacologic effects that not only benefit the patients, but can benefit the society as well. So and if you think about it in terms of a reticular model versus a linear model,
Right.
it really starts to make sense.
Yeah, that's really, really, really fascinating. We all, we talk about the entourage effect. There's isolated compounds. I think there can be some benefit to both sides, but obviously the entourage just kind of supports what you're saying a little bit more on just bringing all these compounds together. It's kind of like eating, the whole. How I explain is you eat the whole orange. Or, you just take the extract out of the orange.
And we have studies on looking at, and I'm going to be writing a paper on this because I'm starting to become frustrated with conventional practitioners who aren't getting the information, and they are making conclusions that I think are not correct, and that needs to be addressed. But for example, with CBD in particular, we can look at dose response curves. So basically you give a certain amount of CBD and you look at the amounts in the blood, and you plot a graph, and it's going to have a curve.
Yep.
The curve might be a straight line, or it might have a curve to it. Mm-hmm. When you use only a single molecule CBD isolate, you get a linear dose response, you get a bell-shaped response curve. Mm-hmm. When you use a single molecule, and what a bell shape is, it's like a U, right?
Yep.
What that means is that there's only a very narrow window. So the CBD is effective, but it's only effective at a certain range or a certain dose. And then above that or below that, it's not as effective. With a linear dose response curve, you have a wider therapeutic window, so there are more options for more dosages to be effective. So we definitely know already, for example, in the case of CBD, that these other compounds are having, just in terms of the dose response curve, something that can benefit us clinically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have a lot to say on that. But this is an immense topic, as I'm sure your listeners are just kind of getting into here. It's not like say, for example, the serotonin system, which is also quite complex, but basically you have something that lands on the system and we feel better, right?
Right.
It's much more in it because the endocannabinoid system is involved with CBD lands on serotonin receptors as well as affecting the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, even, you know, are you talking about clients getting tired? And the flip side of that, you know, taking it with coffee is kind of it's kind of a nice effect because you're turning off or green tea, you know, you're kind of.
What is the reason that they put caffeine in extra strength Excedrin? I'll tell you, I'll give you a clue. It's the same reason that caffeine and cannabis work well together. The caffeine enhances the pain relieving properties of cannabis for daytime use, and for caffeine can also cause anxiety, but for daytime use, yes, just like it enhances in the extra strength Excedrin, the caffeine enhances those other molecules. With cannabis, you can take it with caffeine, and caffeine and cannabis, for many, not for all people, but for many people, especially for pain, can work well together. The other thing that caffeine will do short term is it does enhance alertness, it improves physical performance, and it's also an airway opener. So if I have a patient with a cough or a cold and they normally don't use caffeine in the daytime, they can have a little green tea, and that can, especially like with a bronchitis, that can help open the airways a little bit and have a little more room for that airflow to get back and forth between the inside and the outside of our bodies. So
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's the adenosine receptor that it.
Yes, adenosine receptor, and that also is involved in opening up blood vessels of the heart.
Right.
Now, I want to use that and Cassandra, just interrupt me because I talk a lot.
Nope,
but I just want to talk about some of the cardioprotective aspects of the endocannabinoid system, and specifically with CBD. We need human studies, first of all. But that being said, you can take mice and you can induce a heart attack in them. And there's a control group and there's a CBD group. The size of the heart attack in the CBD group is going to be 66% smaller.
That's huge.
The area of the death of the cardiac muscle cells is going to be 66% smaller than without the CBD. The reason that's so important is the size of that infarct, the size of that damage to the heart muscle wall makes all the difference in terms of survivability. It's one of the reasons that you're still in danger even 10 days after a heart attack, is that if that death of that muscle wall in that heart is too big, you can literally 3 days after a heart attack blow out that muscle wall of the heart and the patient can die. So the size of the infarct is hugely important. Now, what's really cool about that experiment is that they occluded the coronary artery that was providing muscle to the heart tissue. So they blocked the blood flow, and yet the muscle cells lived longer. And we don't really know exactly why that is. We have a lot of ideas, but you go back to the adenosine receptor, we don't have to block that when we take CBD. So not only is the CBD providing theoretically heart protection to the muscle wall of those animals, but if you didn't block the artery, those adenosine molecules might also help perfusion, help the blood get to the tissues more appropriately.
Yeah, and I think we can also say the same for some of the same beneficial, let's say we have all of these kids in hockey or soccer. You have obviously the athletic community kind of starting to wake up to the head trauma benefits of tapping into, and I would say, systemically always being on CBD after a game or what have you, just to buffer.
Or even, this might be even a little bit heretical, and we need studies, and we're not going to talk about kids here, but let's talk about boxers or
MMA fighters.
My MMA fighters taught me about topicals and how. But if you look at the CBD, if you look at the traumatic brain injury studies, there are protective elements to traumatic brain injury. For example, or stroke as well. For example, a positive THC screen correlates with a much lower death from stroke. So you have 500 patients who have a stroke, and this is statistically evened out, and you have the same number of patients who have a positive THC screen. In this particular study, a lot more of the folks who didn't have THC in their system actually they died. This was a human study, and correlation does not equal causality.
Right.
But it is a clue to the puzzle. It's a piece of the puzzle. And in for example, let's talk about seizures in kids.
Yep.
What happens with seizures is there's an electrical storm in the brain, and all the nerve cells, the brain is on fire. I like to say it's like the brain, it's like the nerve cells in the brain are all part of a reality TV show, and all the nerve cells are in the same room screaming at each other,
right,
and nobody's listening. And what happens, it's like when an Italian, I'm Italian, so when the Italian family starts to argue, yep, what do? You talk louder so that people can hear you better, right? No, that's not how it works. Right. But that's what, so in the brain, and there's something called retrograde transmission, so that the endocannabinoid system is what allows the cells on the receiving end of getting yelled at to call a timeout. Say, hey, timeout, I need you to quiet down right now. And this is proven now. In fact, we have an FDA-approved CBD drug where I mentioned before you couldn't prescribe marijuana, but it is basically a marijuana product that now has a prescription.
Epidiolex.
Yes.
Yeah. So I will say with Epidiolex, so I've had, I will speak from experience. I'm not a medical provider. I am not here to give advice. I will preface it with that, but I will say this. 6-year-old, 12 seizures a day. Gotten her down to 3 a day. Now that's just on, a fatty acid 1000 CBD CBG blend. 12-year-old who electrolytes are imbalanced. You've got glutamate excitatory issues. There is a combination. So one thing that I am able to do is send the kids or an adult to a chiropractor per se that can do muscle testing, and that can ask the body, how much of a dosage do you need specifically? And so I am able to tyrate a dosage by muscle testing, and every single one of my epileptic kids or adults, we have been able to significantly reduce, I would say upwards of 80% of seizure activity. That's both with nano. Sometimes it's only a nano that will work, and sometimes it's a lower percentage with CBD, and it's so variable.
It is extremely variable.
To a medical provider and expect them to know what to do. Now they're
and this is the thing. It also presents, CBD and cannabis products present a big problem to the conventional medical community because the standard of care involves a lot of one-on-one time with the patients and with, if they're kids, with families.
Right.
And it requires education and follow-up and more education and trial and error and 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I don't see kids anymore, but I did have a patient with Dravet syndrome who was seizing 300 times a day. We got him down to about 1 to 10 per day when he's on the right dose, and he even went 3 days one time without a seizure. You mentioned glutamate toxicity. That is a byproduct of the seizure activity. It's kind of like that icky feeling you get when you just got into an argument with somebody and it sticks with you for a few days, using the screaming analogy. But the glutamate is toxic in high concentrations to the nerve cells. It can actually cause more problems and even kill people. CBD is protective against that. And so this particular patient, they had trouble when they switched the medicine. And I think that what happened is the company that made the medicine, was a new industry and they're no longer in business, or they got sold or bought out. The parents couldn't find this medication anymore, and his seizure activity came back. And we had to try really hard. and we don't have the tools, which we'll have in 5 or 6 years, that's going to make that process a lot quicker. But we had to search far and wide to figure out, so we think it's partially was the ratio, that this particular patient really liked a certain ratio, and he also liked a certain terpene profile. And we couldn't get terpenes on the labs, not the dabs, on the labs.
Oh, yeah, no dab.
Terpenes on the labs. So we used our noses.
Yeah.
And if you ever heard, do you know what just as a segue, do you know what the hardest test in the world, the lowest pass rate of any licensed test, is? Not the bar exam, it's not the medical exam, it's the sommelier exam.
I was just going to be, is this the sommelier?
And there's a movie on it. I think it's a 2-part movie called Sommelier, but if you want to be a certified sommelier, what they do is they line up the wine, and you not only need to tell what kind of wine is it, which that for me is hard enough, but what year it is, and also where it was grown. You can all tell from the bouquet. So the terpenes are part of the bouquet, and you can smell the beta-caryophyllene. You can smell the myrcene. You can smell the pinene. That's the pine seed. You can smell this the citrus molecules. So the human nose is exquisitely sensitive, and an educated nose can do almost what a regular person would think of as miraculous, but it's not. It's just an experience, and so as we move forward, we are going to get better and better at figuring out what's going on, and the models. The scientific models are not those of 20th century pharmacology. They are of 21st century network-based pharmacology.
And I think that genetics are going to be epigenetics are going to be a big part of that. We're seeing that, in both how we're growing cannabis, the genetics of cannabis is really hot. I mean, I think that's really profound, and how we can curate medicine based on profiling, what we were just talking about, your terpenes, your cannabinoids. So I really do value the isolation of cannabinoids and really studying them. And I also value the symbiotic relationship, the bouquet, per se, of how they can affect us as well.
We don't want to turn down any of this technology. No. Let's say, for example, CBG in and of itself not by itself can be, but if you can get just a pure CBG, and it's in a tincture form, and you add a few drops of that to your THC CBD blend. It doesn't have to be whole plant all the way, but what is important is that the combination of these molecules is doing something. It's doing something special that we are just beginning to learn how to define and describe. That's why I discussed the bouquet. I'm not saying that's the way we should do it, but I'm saying that we have these tools available to us now.
But fundamentally, there's a lot on the table that we have to explore. So my hope is that practitioners like you can continue to give feedback, that we can continue to get research bodies. I'm looking specifically, if you find anyone or anybody out there wants to email me at hello@evokebeauty.com, on women-specific studies on the endocrine system of women, autoimmune diseases. There's so many, and really, what is that, Dr. Jake? Is an endocannabinoid deficiency. So we can look at all these autoimmune, we can look at hormonal issues, we can look at, again, it goes back to how do we support our bodies daily with this endocannabinoid system. So to reflect on what we've talked about today, we've talked about, first, what is our endocannabinoid system, the intricacy between our CB1 and CB2 receptors, how lignans and flavonoids kind of affect that. We talked about the fatty acids, and we need a very, very sufficient fatty acid supply in our body to make our own endocannabinoids. There's all these variables, and I want to know from you kind of where we're at today, and this is a very exciting topic, and we'll do more in the future. Where do you personally want to kind of continue you're an educator. Where do you see yourself going, and where do you see the industry's next moves?
Well, I think that we're still so early that every industry has a shakeout phase. If you look at the
Right.
growth and maturation of industry, I think we're way before the shakeout phase
I
right
have
now.
heard, here's a stat I've heard that cannabis is the third largest growing economy in the world right now.
See, we're just at the beginning, and
I mean, that's how
we
many
don't
people are wanting to hop into this with so little information.
from the
What the
mhm.
shakeout, to your point, is there's going to be a huge
Sure,
shakeout of
sure, sure, sure,
people
sure.
wanting to get into the money
So
to
and
those
we're
loving the science.
here's what in terms of the shakeout. When I say we, I mean the scientific community.
Right.
We don't know what we don't know yet. And the vast majority of clinicians, and I've seen some really terrible studies come out in some really great medical journals. The Lancet just posted one. I think that a colleague and I are going to be writing a letter to the editor. But bad science that looks like good science.
Mm-hmm.
But because there is a disconnect between because there's a disconnect between really how plant molecules work from a scientific perspective, there's a we don't know what we don't know. So in terms of the shakeout, who are going to be left standing? Who was left standing after the comet hit and the dinosaurs got wiped out? Nothing bigger than a chicken was left standing. So to survive the shakeout, you are not only you're in the right place at the right time, that's
Right.
for sure. But if you are running down the wrong road, don't
Right.
confuse movement with progress.
Right.
And having and utilizing the best of information that we have, botanical medicine, and we could do another podcast, but botanical medicine, the science is hugely important. What's also important is the hand-to-hand, which also means the verbal, the oral tradition. Because you can, no matter what the cannabis like there's no such thing as a perfect car or a perfect place to live. There's no such thing as a perfect cannabis medicine.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a benefit and a detriment to each of those. So understanding the better that you can understand the terrain, the better you will be able to advocate for yourself and your own health, for your family's health, for your clients' health, or for your positioning in the industry. And there are going to be a lot of big changes, and it's only going to be getting bigger. So it's a fast-moving train. At a certain point in time, however, there will be I think that we're probably 5+ years from this shakeout happening, but make no doubts about it. It happens in every industry. Right now, we're just going up on the roller coaster right now, and it's starting to look really exciting. So,
Yeah. I agree. Well, I'm so glad that, we're a part of the journey together, and I look forward to future podcasts with you. Is there anything else that, you would like to share based on, CBD, the endocannabinoid system, and we can kind of launch into another topic, another podcast, but is there anything that you wanted to talk about today?
Well, I think that in terms of things that I have realized lately, kind of epiphany type of things, I think that this plant medicine, this cannabis-based plant medicine, whether it's hemp-based or whole THC-based, I think one of the things that it does biologically is that it enhances connection and communication between cells. And I think also that our culture is sick.
Yep.
And I think that the endocannabinoid system, not only because it modulates individuals, but it also can be a regulator for society as well. So what I see this plant doing is fostering connection. And if you work with your own medicines, or if you have a CBD product that you use and you take it and you modify it, like putting it in a lotion and you're making that deepens your own personal connection with nature, with the plant, with your own self. So this medicine, a part of it is about connection and communication for the purposes of healing something that is not good or sick, whether it be a biological system or a family, So I really feel that, Bob Marley said that it's the healing of the nations. I don't need to be all woo-woo about that, but I see that it really, when I see folks who are connecting and empowered by this, I know that it's a good thing, and that I think is one of the reasons that it is spreading so quickly and so widely. It's a global phenomenon.
It really is. And I really love where you took that. I mean, the connectivity on so many levels, spiritually, I even look at the younger generations falling back in love with farming. Now, I grew up in Southwest, Midwest Minnesota. I grew up
Okay.
picking rock on fields.
Huh.
And so the resurgence as well as taking our farms and pulling them back into organic practices, people praying and doing binaural beats and sound frequencies over the plant before they put it into a bottle. There's such an emergence of awareness that's going on. And like you said, on whether we're holding an Elementa group and we're bringing women together to talk about this on a one-to-one basis, or we're doing what we're doing, trying to connect different medical practitioners. There's so much connectivity. And so thank you so much for your time today. One last thing on a personal level, on that connectivity, is there anything, just doesn't have to be cannabis related, that you've awakened to personally as of late that you would want to share with our listeners?
Well, I think that for me, what I've really realized in my own personal, if you call it my personal path, is the importance of music and connection. And I think that the way, even if it's just being in a car with somebody and singing along to the same tune, I think that there's a musical, it's not literally music, but to use the analogy, there's a musical element to this medicine in terms of harmonics, in terms of if I'm in tune and I'm feeling good and I'm projecting it, whether that be vocally or through a wind instrument or whatever, that resonance gets picked up, and it gets picked up in one of two ways. You can either resonate with it,
right,
which feels beautiful, and that takes it to the singing study in women enhancing the endocannabinoid tone, and I was one of those kids who was a terrible singer. If you are dissonant,
right,
it can also let you know that, hey, I'm a little bit out of tune here.
Yep.
And I got to do something about that. So there's a musical quality to this plant medicine that is more of an analogy than anything else. I don't want to sound non-scientific, but it's just a connection. It's a way it is a non-verbal way to connect.
To me, music is the perfect analogy of what we're talking about today. And that's not just cannabis. That is life in itself. It is everything on its highest frequency coming together and providing life, an eternal life that just continues to flow out of you. And you pivot to the dissonances, right? To always be in this state of symphony. So, Dr. Jake, I could not thank you more for being on the Awaken
pleasure,
podcast.
Cassandra. What a great talk this has been. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we will definitely have you on again. Now, one last thing, where can everybody find you?
Sure. You can find me at cannabismatrix.com. You can email me, Dr. Jake, at drjakefelice.com, and also my website, drjakefelice.com. I have a YouTube channel, just /Jake Felice on the YouTube. Feel free to follow. I have a pretty robust Facebook page where I only post peer-reviewed information. So it's not all fancy with the pictures, but you can go into the deep science there. Again, stay tuned to this podcast. I'd love to come back in a few months and we can have another hour or so together, Cassandra. This was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I have to thank you because you had posted a Minnesota article based on cancer research and the positive effects that in Minnesota that we're doing research with cancer and cannabis. So thank you for posting.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
You bet. So thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for listening to the Awaken Beauty podcast. I am Cassandra, your organic beauty and endocannabinoid mentor. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And please do one more conscientious measure, and that is to leave your personal aha or that one takeaway that you captured from our talk with Dr. Jake Felice today so other women can also awaken to your brilliant aha and follow this podcast. So until next time, stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back.